It's frustrating when things like this happen. For those who missed it or are on a Mac, this is the blue screen of death on Windows, a phenomenon that buries all unsaved files and wrecks the user's nerves. But what exactly is this screen? Why is it blue? And when did it first appear? To answer these questions, we'll dive into the history of Windows and uncover many interesting facts. As it turns out, if you dig deeper, you can discover the hidden mechanisms of the operating system and understand how such errors occur and why they require special attention. So today, we're diving into the history of Windows, including some insights from former Microsoft developer Dev Plummer. Let's get started. How did this thing even come about? Let's start with the name. The abbreviation BSOD stands for Blue Screen of Death. This term actually originated from internet connectivity. The screen first appeared in the very first version of Windows. Back then, Windows wasn't yet a standalone operating system, but just an interface for MS-DOS. Remember that? It wasn't exactly a program, but not quite a full operating system either. Nevertheless, Windows already had its own kernel, and it was responsible for memory management, which meant that it displayed the blue screen of death when illegal memory operations occurred. This is what that screen looked like, and immediately the question arises, what's all that text? It's simple. It's the contents of the system memory, but presented not as zeros and ones, but as characters. Only the most advanced users could make sense of it, while others were probably just scared. Why does the blue screen of death occur? There's a common belief that it's caused by problems with the processor, power supply, drivers, or because the thermal paste on the graphics card hasn't been changed in a while. But that's not entirely true. To understand this, let's take a look under the hood of the Windows operating system. The most important thing here is that the OS operates in two modes, kernel mode and user mode. User mode is pretty straightforward. In modern versions of Windows, this mode runs applications and connected devices like flash drives and printers. An error in this mode will only cause the program to crash or display an error message. No blue screen in user mode. But kernel mode is where things get interesting. The kernel is the most critical component of the operating system. It handles many aspects of the computer's operation, from memory allocation for programs and rendering the interface to powering the computer's components. And from all this, we're interested in memory management. The kernel's main task in this regard is to ensure that each process has enough memory while isolating processes from each other. This is done to prevent one process from accessing another's memory. But there's a problem. Various bugs, viruses, and vulnerabilities can lead to software attempting to access another process's memory or the kernel's memory, or requesting more memory than the system has. So, how do you protect against this? Microsoft's correct answer is to trigger the blue screen. In this case, the kernel immediately logs this attempt and shuts down the system, causing the BSOD. So, importantly, no unauthorized memory access occurs. The kernel intercepts the command, and while the blue screen is displayed, it collects a log of all the processes that were running, creating a dump. This is needed so that OS developers can analyze the processes and figure out what led to the error. Also, some devices that require high performance or need access to all components, like graphics cards or security components like TPM, operate in kernel mode. For such devices, an error in the driver equals an error in the kernel, which means it will lead to a blue screen. That's why, for example, it's considered very bad practice when game developers install anti-cheat protection into the kernel of the operating system. This threatens the stability of the PC, even when the game isn't running. But it turns out the blue screen isn't always a bad thing. For example, it's considered an excellent tool for debugging the system and programs. It collects all the system's memory into one file, making bug hunting easier. For this purpose, Windows also has tools that allow you to manually trigger a BSOD. We'll talk about one of these later. So, once again, a blue screen occurs when there's an error with a program or driver accessing system memory. And there can be many reasons for this, from bugs in the program or a virus to a faulty memory module. The creators of Windows understood that this tool needed to be more user-friendly, so it's particularly interesting to trace how the blue screen evolved over time. For example, in Windows 3, a different, more understandable screen design was introduced. It now showed what error occurred and in which driver. This made it much easier to understand the cause of the error. But that's not the most interesting part. First, after the BSOD appeared, you could continue working on your computer. The message, "Press any key to continue," kind of encouraged that. The developers did this so that users could save their work and then restart on their own. But the correct solution was to restart immediately. To do this, you had to press Ctrl+Alt+Delete, hence the old name Ctrl+Alt+Delete screen. Secondly, all the text on this screen was written personally by Steve Ballmer. Yes, the former CEO of Microsoft, and something like Bill Gates' right-hand man. Rumor has it that in the early stages of Windows 3 development, he visited the development department and saw an early prototype of the blue screen. He didn't like the wording of the message that the screen displayed. One of the employees suggested that Steve could do better, and he did. You could say that Windows 3, 95, and 98 users saw a message on the blue screen written by the chief engineer of Microsoft himself. But overall, the technology's implementation was challenging. In particular, one of the main features of Windows 98 was the plug-and-play technology. Before this, whenever you connected a new device, you had to install its driver manually. Old-timers will remember. But with plug-and-play, the system automatically recognized the device and installed the necessary drivers. Nowadays, this seems like a given, but back then, it was a real innovation. However, during a Windows 98 presentation, programmer Chris Capocella connected a scanner to demonstrate this technology, and right after the connection message, the system showed a blue screen in front of the entire audience. But why did this happen? At the time, all devices operated in kernel mode, which meant that even a printer could trigger a blue screen. Since then, Microsoft decided that such an approach clearly harmed Windows stability. So they decided to move drivers to user mode, and the next version of the OS, Windows 2000, was no longer just a shell on top of MS-DOS. However, this isn't as interesting as the new BSOD design. It included a textual description of the error and general information about what might have caused the failure, such as viruses or drivers. The ability to continue working was also removed. Now, pressing any key led to a restart. The developers believed that if a critical error occurred, further use of the computer could even cause damage. The next iteration of the blue screen stayed with us from Windows XP to Windows 7. This is the version of the blue screen of death that many of you have probably seen. And one important change associated with Windows XP is that the graphics card driver was moved back from user mode to kernel mode. Yes, in older versions of Windows, a critical error in the graphics card didn't cause a blue screen, but the cost was lower performance. Every request from the graphics card to memory went through the kernel, adding latency and burdening the system. When they moved it back to the kernel, performance increased, but now a bug in the graphics card driver leads to a blue screen. So be careful with overclocking. It often leads to driver corruption, which in turn causes a blue screen. Windows 8 and its updated BSOD deserve special attention. Instead of a screen full of text, there's now a simple message saying the system encountered a problem and diagnostics have started automatically. If the blue screen can't be resolved at the software level, the system will suggest resetting the computer's settings, in the worst case, deleting files. All of this is done so that the user can solve the problem with minimal effort. And yes, whereas before developers had to parse the memory dump line by line, now the system automatically collects logs and sends them to Microsoft for further analysis. There's also an error code on the screen in the form of letters and numbers, with a QR code below to find out more. Another important innovation is that when a second monitor is connected, the blue screen now displays on all devices simultaneously. By the way, you can still trigger the blue screen manually using a built-in Windows tool. To do this, open the registry editor and add a parameter that allows you to trigger a BSOD by pressing Ctrl+Scroll lock. This is used to generate a memory dump for further analysis. For example, if you need to test your driver or check for a bug in a program, but I'm sure it's better not to do this. One of the reasons is that blue is the easiest color to recognize for people with color vision deficiencies. Almost everyone, except for those who are completely colorblind, can distinguish blue. That's why, incidentally, the main color of Facebook is also blue, because Mark Zuckerberg has difficulty distinguishing colors. But BSODs aren't always blue. For example, in early builds of Windows 98, the screen was red, and in beta versions of Windows 11, the blue screen was changed to black. However, these colors didn't stick. Over more than 30 years, people have come to associate a sudden blue screen with something serious happening. The only exception is in Windows 11 Insider builds, which are meant for beta testers. There, the blue screen was replaced with green as a sort of reward, like saying, "Good job finding that bug." But is Windows the only system that scares users with its blue screen? It turns out that similar features exist in Linux and Mac OS. There, it's called a kernel panic. The activation mechanism is similar to Windows, but the way the error is displayed differs. In Linux distributions, it shows a log of the most recent events, while in macOS, after a reboot, a message appears saying that an error has occurred. And lastly, an interesting fact, you can trigger a blue screen yourself. To do this, you need to run the command prompt as an administrator and enter the command win in it. This is a critically important system process, and the command will attempt to restart it. The system's protection will kick in, causing a BSOD. Honestly, before entering this command, I didn't even know what the blue screen looked like on Windows 11. I think the last time I saw it was in the early 2000s, but people around me say it happens often. So, leave a comment telling us when and under what circumstances you last saw a blue screen of death or its equivalent on a Mac. That's pretty interesting too. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you found it interesting. This was The Rural. See you in other videos. Subscribe, hit like, and ring the bell so you don't miss anything. See you in the future.